My name is Ariana. I've been married to Hudson for over 17 years, and we've shared a cozy apartment courtesy of the real estate firm where I work as an appraiser. Our son, Waylon, has already graduated from college and moved out, which made Hudson and I empty nesters. Hudson maintained a regular office job, and for many years, our relationship had been quite stable. However, recently, Hudson's constant critiques of my actions became more frequent and harder to endure. Nonetheless, I remained hopeful that this was a temporary phase. As my 52nd birthday neared, we planned a celebration with our friends and family, hoping it might rekindle our connection. We reserved a lovely restaurant and sent out invitations, setting the stage for a perfect evening. On the event day, our guests began to arrive, and I greeted them cheerfully. However, I felt a nagging sense that something was amiss, especially since my parents were uncharacteristically late. Amidst the festivities, I stepped away to call my mother. "Where are you guys?" The party started. I tried to sound calm, but concern tinged my voice. After a pause, my mother chilled me. "Ariana, darling, I'm so sorry. Your father passed away this morning." I was struck dumb with shock and disbelief. "No, that can't be true," I managed, but my mother's sorrow confirmed the grim reality. She had intended to tell me the next day, to not ruin my celebration. Returning to the party in a daze, Hudson noticed my distress and immediately asked what was wrong. I told him through tears about my father. His response was startling. "That's terrible, Ariana, but we can't cancel the party now. Everything's been paid for, and it wouldn't be fair to our guests." I was stunned by his insensitivity. Unable to comprehend his lack of empathy, I announced to everyone that I had to leave to be with my mother and encouraged them to stay and enjoy the celebration. As I headed for the door, Hudson called after me, suggesting I was being dramatic and could visit my mother the next day. Angered and heartbroken by his reaction, I left him there, speechless, as I rushed out into the cool night air. When I arrived at my childhood home, I found my mother in the dark, clutching one of my father's sweaters. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met mine. As we embraced, the grief we shared was palpable. Sitting with her in the silent, dimly lit room, I realized my life had irrevocably changed, not just because of my father's death, but because I had seen the true nature of my husband on a day that should have brought us closer. On the day of the funeral, I stood beside my mother, accepting condolences with Waylon by my side, offering his quiet strength. As we faced this profound loss together, I understood the depth of the bonds that truly mattered. As I looked around at the gathering after the funeral service, I noticed the glaring absence of Hudson and his family. Their absence felt like a stark betrayal. Later, as we regrouped at my mother's home, Waylon confronted me, puzzled and upset. "Mom, where's Dad and Grandma and Grandpa?" I could only shake my head, a mix of anger and disappointment bubbling up as I replied, "I don't know. Honey, they didn't come." Waylon was visibly frustrated, and I could hardly blame him. That evening, after the guests had left and my mother drifted into a weary sleep, I called Hudson, unable to mask my frustration. "Where were you today?" I demanded. His excuse was that he and his parents had gotten sick, supposedly from something they ate at the birthday dinner. The timing was too convenient, and I couldn't hide my skepticism. "All three of you? You couldn't make it to my father's funeral? Do you realize how that looks, how that feels?" His apology felt hollow, and I hung up, too angry to continue the conversation. In the weeks that followed, my mother's health deteriorated, and she sank into a deep depression. I juggled work and her care, while Hudson grew increasingly distant and irritable about the situation. One evening, he suggested, rather coldly, that we consider placing her in a nursing home. I was appalled. "No, she doesn't have much time left, and I want to be with her," I insisted. We debated heatedly until I proposed a solution that would alter our lives, moving into her larger, more accommodating house to care for her. Hudson, disgusted, balked at the idea. "I'm not obligated to take care of a sick stranger," he said, refusing to see her as anything but an inconvenience. The argument stretched over days, with Hudson unmoved by my pleas. It wasn't until I pointed out the financial benefits of moving, no housing or grocery expenses, that he reluctantly agreed. Moving day was a mix of emotions. My mother's house was spacious and beautifully renovated, a sharp contrast to our previous apartment. Hudson seemed impressed by the property, commenting on its beauty and the hard work my father had put into it, though I held back my sharper thoughts. Initially, Hudson boasted about our new living arrangement to his colleagues, omitting the real reason for our move. However, as time passed, his dissatisfaction became evident. One evening, as I was cooking, he burst into the kitchen, complaining about the pervasive smell of illness. His harsh words were the last straw for me. I slammed down the knife I was holding, my patience finally worn thin. As I was preparing dinner and chopping vegetables, the smell of illness filled the room, a constant reminder of my mother's condition. Hudson's indifference grew each day. He avoided her room and complained whenever he passed her door. It was heartbreaking to watch my mother suffer not just from her illness, but also from Hudson's blatant contempt. One quiet evening, as Hudson and I sat in a strained silence at the dinner table, my mother gathered her strength to speak. "Ariana, Hudson," she began, her voice frail yet firm, "I want to thank you both for taking care of me. I know it hasn't been easy." Hudson barely acknowledged her, his eyes fixed on his plate. "I want to show my appreciation," Mom continued, causing Hudson to finally look up with a hint of interest. "Hudson, I'd like to give you the land this house is built on, and Ariana, the house itself will be yours." I was stunned. "Mom, no, you don't have to do this," I protested, but Hudson's interest was visibly piqued. My mother insisted on proceeding with her plans, adding that any remaining money would go to Waylon. Hudson, unable to hide his excitement, leaped up and fetched a bottle of wine. "Let's celebrate," he exclaimed, pouring himself a glass. Under his breath, he muttered, "Maybe the old gal will kick it sooner rather than later." I was horrified by his cruel words. "How dare you?" I hissed, rising so quickly that my chair crashed behind me. "You heartless monsters." Hudson scoffed and retorted dismissively, implying that my mother was already as good as gone, and that at least we would benefit from it. The ensuing argument was ferocious. Hudson insulted me ruthlessly, and I responded with equal fervor, releasing years of repressed frustration and disappointment. He stormed out, declaring he would stay with his parents. As days turned into weeks, Hudson stayed away, and an urgent work trip came up, a trip I couldn't refuse as it was crucial for my job, now more than ever since I was the sole caregiver for my mother. The idea of leaving her alone was daunting. I discussed my dilemma with her, and with typical selflessness, she suggested a temporary stay in hospice care. "It's just while you're away," she reassured me. "Those places are comfortable, and I'll be well taken care of." Tears filled my eyes as I agreed, heartbroken yet knowing it was the best option. We arranged her hospice care, and I prepared for my trip, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. I didn't inform Hudson about the hospice or my travel plans. He was still with his parents, purportedly to teach me a lesson. The irony of his absence during this time of genuine need was not lost on me. The night before I left, I sent Hudson a terse text, "Going on a business trip. Please look after the house." I hoped he might reflect on his actions, but more than anything, I needed him to at least maintain the practical aspects of our shared life in my absence. I didn't expect a response from Hudson, and none came. 5 days into my business trip, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Hudson. His tone dripped with a twisted delight as he greeted me. "Hello, Ariana. Guess what I've done? I've demolished your precious house." Watching the walls fall and the roof collapse was spectacular. I felt a chill run through me. "You did what? Why would you do something like that?" I managed to say. He replied with disturbing glee, "Because now you'll have to rely on me to build a new one on my land." "That's right, my land. Your mother gave it to me, remember? You'll be dependent on me, Ariana. Just like a good wife should be." As the gravity of his actions sank in, a hysterical laugh burst from me, echoing through the empty hotel room. Hudson seemed unsettled by my reaction. "Why are you laughing? This isn't funny, Ariana." Once I regained my composure, my voice was calm but icy. Oh, Hudson, you fool. Mom changed her mind at the last minute. She didn't trust you, especially after seeing how you treated her. So she switched it. The house is yours, or rather was yours. But the land? That's mine. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line before Hudson's small, disbelieving voice came through. You're lying. I'm not, I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. And Hudson, I want a divorce. I hung up, my hands trembling as the reality of his betrayal and the need for a divorce settled in. It struck me then with horrifying clarity. Hudson didn't know about Mom's move to hospice. He had been willing to demolish the house with her potentially inside. Upon returning, I immediately filed for divorce. Hudson fought bitterly, claiming the land based on my mother's initial verbal agreement, but I was prepared. I had the updated paperwork showing the last-minute changes she made. The legal battle was fierce, but justice prevailed, and I retained the land, leaving Hudson with nothing but the remains of his destructiveness. Throughout this ordeal, Waylon was my steadfast supporter. When he learned of his father's actions, his reaction was one of shock and revulsion. He did what? I can't believe it. I'm done with him, Waylon declared, severing ties with his father. After finalizing the divorce and gaining full ownership of the land, I chose to sell it. The proceeds allowed me to purchase a modest apartment. Meanwhile, my mother's health continued to decline. I visited her daily at the hospice, savoring every moment. She passed away peacefully, with me by her side, a few months later. Her funeral was small and private, and again Hudson and his family were absent, which this time felt like a relief. In the weeks following her passing, as I sorted through her belongings, I sensed something amiss. It wasn't until one evening, while browsing eBay, that I discovered listings for familiar items: Mom's antique vase, her cherished armchair, even the pearls Dad had given her on their 27th anniversary. Anger coursed through me as I realized Hudson was behind this. The next morning, fueled by a mix of fury and resolve, I drove to Hudson's parents' house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, ready to confront him and reclaim what was rightfully part of my heritage. When I arrived at Hudson's parents' house and knocked, it was my former father-in-law who answered the door. He appeared surprisingly frail and pale, which caught me off guard. Are you okay? I asked impulsively, concerned by his gaunt appearance. He twisted his face in anger and snapped back, I'm perfectly healthy, unlike your parents. His harsh words stung, and I responded more out of reflex than a genuine apology. I'm sorry. My real purpose came forth as I continued. I've seen my mother's items for sale online. I want them back. Hudson's mother joined us at the door, her expression one of feigned concern. Oh, Ariana dear, those things belong to us now. After all, the house was Hudson's when your mother passed. My frustration mounted. That's not how it works, and you know it. Those are my family's heirlooms, and I want them back now. They refused, and the ensuing argument turned bitter and loud. Eventually, they shut the door in my face, but I was far from defeated. Determined, I headed straight to the police station and filed a report. Faced with potential legal action, Hudson's parents reluctantly returned my mother's belongings: the jewelry, the furniture, everything. 7 months had passed since the dust settled on my divorce and the ordeal with Hudson's family. Life had slowly started to find a new rhythm, and I was beginning to heal from the wounds of betrayal. Then, unexpectedly, I received news that shattered our fragile peace. My former father-in-law had passed away from cancer, which had been in its advanced, untreatable stages by the time it was diagnosed. Despite our strained relations, I felt a pang of sympathy. No one deserved to suffer that way. My empathy, however, was soon tested when I received a summons to the notary's office for the reading of his will. Hudson, his mother, Waylon, and I were all called to attend. The atmosphere was tense. Hudson avoided looking at me, treating me as if I were a stranger, while his mother couldn't hide her disdain. How dare you show your face here, you ungrateful gold digger, she hissed as I took my seat. I kept my composure, and Waylon offered his hand in silent support. The notary began to read the will, and the contents took everyone by surprise. My former father-in-law had left his house to Waylon, while the land and money were bequeathed to Hudson and his mother. Hudson and his mother erupted in anger. "This is outrageous," Hudson yelled. "Everything should have come to us. We're his real family." The notary adjusted his glasses and calmly stated, "The will is legally binding. Mr. Matthew was of sound mind when he made these decisions. You won't be able to contest this in court." As we left the office, I noticed Waylon was deep in thought and unusually quiet. I gave him space, knowing he would talk when he was ready. 3 weeks later, I was enjoying a moment of peace in my apartment when my phone rang. It was my former mother-in-law. Her voice panicked. "Ariana, you have to come quickly. Your son, he's gone mad. He's hired construction equipment to tear down the house." Rushing to the scene, I found chaos. Heavy machinery loomed over the house, and Waylon stood resolute. Hudson and his mother were frantic, pleading with the construction workers to stop. Waylon approached me, his expression determined yet calm. "Mom, I know this might seem extreme," he began, preparing to explain his drastic decision. Waylon looked at me with a resolve that was hard and sharp. "It's retribution for what they did. To Grandma's house. To you. To us," he explained. I nodded, understanding the swirl of pain and anger that fueled his decision. "I know, sweetie. I'm not here to stop you." He gave a nod to the foreman, and the noise of the destruction filled the air. Hudson and his mother's cries were lost amidst the sounds of crashing walls and breaking glass. As the house fell, my emotions were a storm. Part of me mourned the loss of what once was, memories of laughter and love that the house once held. But another part of me felt a cathartic release, a sense of justice being served. Weeks later, as I was settling into a peaceful evening, a knock interrupted my solitude. Opening the door, I found Hudson and his mother, their appearance ragged and worn. "Ariana," Hudson began, his voice a blend of desperation and veiled bitterness, "we need to talk. We have nowhere to go. We were hoping we could stay with you for a while." I was speechless. "Stay with me? After everything? You've always been so kind and responsible," his mother chimed in, her eyes pleading. The audacity of their request left me reeling. These were the people who had inflicted so much pain, who had disrespected my mother in her final days, now seeking my charity. "No," I replied with finality, "absolutely not." Their faces fell, but I continued, my voice firm as years of suppressed frustration and hurt surged. "Have you forgotten how you treated my mother? How you labeled her a burden? How you were ready to destroy her house while she might have been inside, just to spite me?" They seemed ashamed, but beneath that, I sensed their simmering anger. "We've made mistakes," Hudson admitted reluctantly. "Where are we supposed to go?" he added. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. "That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, and now you must live with the consequences, just like I had to." They left, muttering under their breath. After they were gone, I immediately blocked their numbers. I wanted no further disturbances from them. Through mutual friends, I later learned that Hudson had sold the land where the demolished house once stood. With the money, he purchased a small apartment in a rundown part of the city. Mentioning this to Waylon during one of our dinners, he snorted, "That's where they belong," his tone bitter. "In a crumbling apartment, surrounded by decay. It's fitting, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was a twinge of pity for Hudson and his mother, now reduced to such a state. But the larger part of me remembered all the harm they had caused, the harsh words and cruel actions. The past months have been transformative for me. My career at the real estate company was thriving, and I had recently received a generous quarterly bonus. Being recognized for my hard work was gratifying, especially after such a tumultuous period. Running my hand over the smooth surface of my mother's restored old writing desk, I felt a connection to her. The familiar grain of the wood evoked memories of her sitting there, writing letters, and managing her finances. It felt as if a part of her was still with me, guiding me as I rebuilt my life. The ringing of my phone interrupted my reflections. It was Waylon, his voice buzzing with excitement. As I answered the phone, Waylon's voice brimmed with excitement. Mom, I've got news, he announced eagerly. What is it, honey? I asked, though I had a hunch about what he might say. I proposed to Melody, and she said yes. My heart overflowed with joy. Melody was a wonderful young woman, kind and intelligent, and she truly brought out the best in Waylon. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you both. We talked for a while about their plans for the future, and then Waylon's tone shifted to something more serious. Mom, there's something else I want to talk to you about, the wedding. I've decided I don't want to invite Dad or Grandma. After everything they've done, I don't want them there on the happiest day of my life. I took a deep breath, understanding his decision. Waylon, it's entirely your decision. Your wedding day should be a celebration of love and joy, surrounded by people who truly care about you and Melody. If that's what feels right for you, then I support you completely. After we hung up, my mind lingered on Hudson and his mother. I didn't actively seek information about them, but snippets of their lives reached me occasionally. The last update was that Hudson was working 2 jobs to make ends meet, still living in that rundown apartment with his mother. They had tried to control and break me, but instead, they found themselves struggling in the mess they'd made, while I had emerged from the ordeal stronger and more resilient. I picked up a framed photo of my parents from the newly restored side table. Gazing at it, I whispered, "I wish you could see this, Mom and Dad. I think you'd be proud." Their memories and the values they instilled in me continued to guide me, reinforcing my resolve to live a life filled with integrity and love, a stark contrast to the bitterness and regret that seemed to fill Hudson and his mother's days. My parents' legacy was a beacon in my journey, and I felt their quiet approval in my heart as I navigated this new chapter of my life.
My name is Bella. I'm 28 years old. I'm in charge of general affairs at a large trading company. My boyfriend is Andres. We've been together for 8 years, and he's 2 years older than me. We'd been saving up since we were thinking about marriage for a few years now. He finally proposed to me on my birthday. I had this image in my head. A nice restaurant, a fancy meal, maybe some wine, and then Andres would snap his fingers, the lights would dim, and, well, in reality, we went camping. It's something we both love. Andres was simmering soup over the fire, and I had my favorite drink in hand. The wood crackled, and out of nowhere, Andres pulls out this small box. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. What? What exactly is this?" "A ring?" I asked, already knowing. "Yes, let's get married. Isn't it time to get it right?" he suggested hopefully, looking at me. I blinked, trying to process everything. "All right, everything's settled," I replied. "Good. Cheers," he smiled. I was quite drunk at the time, honestly. Looking back, I wish I could have done more, but we were not the type of couple who would be suited to such a celebrity-like marriage proposal. Perhaps this type of marriage proposal would have been appropriate for us. Andres came to my parents' house to greet them after the marriage proposal. "I'm so nervous," he blurted out as we drove. "Consider this your first challenge," I teased. "You've got to give it your all, it's for us. But don't worry, next time it'll be my turn." I tried to encourage him. He nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "I'm ready. I'll take you as my example," he responded. I laughed softly. "You're so brave, but seriously, how did you end up falling for me?" I teased him again, seeing his eyes dart nervously toward the house. "Look, we're almost there," Andres uttered. We parked, and I handed him his tie. "It's okay to be enthusiastic, but you should also look the part. Here, let me fix this." I straightened his tie, tightening it just enough. "There, don't I look like a wife already?" I thought to myself, but I wasn't going to say that aloud. My parents live in a suburban house. Although the house is 4 bedrooms, the yard is quite large. My father loves outdoor activities, and he met my mother when he was climbing a mountain. That's why I love outdoor activities, and camping is one of my hobbies. So I think I'm from a typical family. My father has retired, but he still works at a relative's company. I joined the company with great enthusiasm, but they don't give me any work, and I get paid for this, so my life must be easy and happy, right? He spoke. Well, both of my parents are in good health, and I tell myself that it's a good thing that they're happy. When I arrived home, Both of my parents greeted me at the door. "Nice to meet you. My name is Andres," he began. I would like to marry Bella," Andres stammered, too nervous to get the words out properly. At that moment, I fell in love with him all over again. "Andres, are you sure you're not going to regret this?" my father asked, laughing. "If you're okay with it, go ahead," he added. "Bella's getting married," my mom chimed in, her excitement catching me off guard. I was furious. "What are my parents on about?" I uttered. Andres was clearly relieved, thinking we were just stopping by to say hello. But no, my parents insisted on dinner and even offered for us to stay the night. When my mom called Andres' house to inform them, his father answered, "Thank you for the kindness, but no, there might be some extra charges later on," Andres' father said coldly. I've heard that Andres' father was the president of a large corporation. Extra charges? My mother was confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm the president of a large corporation," he continued. "A lot of people beg for money from me, and I don't want my son involved with such beggars." My mother's tone sharpened. "So, you think we're poor people begging for money?" "I'm saying there's a possibility," he shot back before hanging up. "Who does this man think he is?" My mother was enraged. "What happened?" I inquired. I politely invited Andres to stay, but his father refused, saying, "You're asking me for money." Andres immediately apologized. "I'm so sorry. My parents were duped once, so they're suspicious of everyone," he explained. My father waved it off, patting Andres on the shoulder. "There's no need to apologize. From now on, you can gradually build a good relationship with them. Today was a good day for me. Please take good care of Bella," he uttered. Andres left that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his father than I'd imagined. And I was right. His father turned out to be a powerful businessman, someone who had taken a small family company and turned it into a huge machinery manufacturer. Of course, his family home is also opulent. Despite being a private residence, it is a 3-story reinforced concrete structure surrounded on all sides by high walls. When I first saw it, I was speechless. "Nervous now, huh?" Andres chuckled beside me. "Isn't it natural?" I shot back. "I'd be nervous as well." We went inside, greeted his mother, and was led to the guest room. My father-in-law was sitting there. He told me to take a seat, and I sat across from him, trying to keep my composure. "Nice to meet you. I'm Bella, and Andres and I are getting married," I began. "I'm Morgan, Andres' father," he said. "Thank you for coming so far today. Please put yourself at ease." "Thank you kindly," I replied. Andres' father, whom I had never met before, looked like he's in a bad mood. "Let's get right to it. What's your purpose here?" he asked. "Excuse me?" I asked, thrown off guard. "I'm the CEO of a large corporation. I have a lot to offer. Are you after that?" I was shocked. My purpose? The purpose of the marriage is that I love Andres, but I never imagined that he would devise an oblique purpose on his own. "No way, I have no such thoughts," I replied. "But excuse me, what does your parents do?" he continued. "My father has already retired and he has returned to my cousin's company to work. I'm not sure what he's up to, but he's doing well. My mother is a stay-at-home mom and is doing well," I explained. Andres' father became agitated hearing this. I far off my brow. "I see, but from what I've heard, it doesn't sound like a particularly proper-ass life. What do you do, by the way?" he inquired. "I'm the general affairs manager at a large trading company in New York," I responded. "General affairs?" he scoffed. "Not much progress to be made there." "What is your point?" I demanded. "My point," he said, "is that you're clearly looking to rely on Andres and me after you marry." Huh? I couldn't help it. What was this man talking about? "Are you serious?" I shot back. "We are not poor. We lead a normal life, and I don't need your money." He laughed coldly. "You're just trying to play the game, aren't you? Your family wants money so they can enjoy their retirement," my father-in-law reasoned. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, unable to contain my anger anymore. Andres tried to step in. "Dad, that's not true. Her parents are good people." But his father wasn't having it. "Shut up. You're just a naive boy." I cut him off, fury boiling inside me. "We are not poor. My parents are wonderful people and I won't let you insult them," I shouted. Oh, Bella, calm down, Andres pleaded. Keep your mouth shut, my father-in-law snapped, his voice trembling with anger. Andres's father glared at me and continued, What I mean by poor is a family with less money than ours. A marriage cannot function unless both parties are on the same level, and those who do not have money will expect the wealthy to provide for them. So, you'll undoubtedly do the same. Am I mistaken? You may argue that things are different now, but I know it will happen sooner or later, he concluded. Something snapped in my heart at his judgmental tone. I see what you're saying. Please find a wealthy life. Please excuse me. I stood up. Please, 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 she's leaving, Morgan uttered. Andres and his mother were shocked. I left without looking back. Wait a second, Andres yelled after me. No, what's the deal with your father? He looks down on me as if I'm a beggar. He's repulsive. I resented. Andres was becoming increasingly irritated with me as I snapped at him. Andres is upset with me and was getting on my nerves. My father was probably in a bad mood today, he said. Enough. Why must you say that to me? I don't need you making fun of me, I replied angrily. Hey, Andres exclaimed. I'm sorry, but I'm just not feeling it. Today, I'm going home. Please do not contact me for a while, I added. I clung to Andres, but I removed his hand and walked away. Andres called and texted me several times, but I ignored them. When I got home, I was still angry. I told my parents what had happened as soon as I walked into the living room. That's terrible, my father said. Is my family really that poor? Mom joined the conversation. That's just terrible. Andres was a good man, but he's gotten even worse since the last time he called, my mother added, extremely disappointed. So how about you? Are you ready to leave Andres? My father asked. I still love Andres and hope to marry him, I replied. I see. Why don't you think for a little before going back to see him? My father suggested. If things continue to be complicated, I'll go, he added. Really? I asked. Yes, for the sake of my daughter, I'll look after it. My father was kind and comforting. They don't seem to know much about us, so you should talk to them. My mom agreed with him. My parents convinced me to meet Andres' parents once more. I contacted Andres and asked him to allow me to see his parents again. Andres was overjoyed and immediately got to work. I could now hear the start of the second round. My adversary was a formidable foe. Am I Don Quixote confronting a massive windmill, or a hero of justice, defeating an evil monster? On Saturday, we decided to visit Andres' house. It was my decisive battle, and Saturday had arrived. I was agitated all morning, staring at the clock, anticipating the appointed time. When the time came, I met Andres, and we drove to his parents' house. When I entered the house, my father-in-law was still sitting in the guest room. Hello, it's been a while, he said. I greeted him. My father-in-law continued to look at me as if I was bothersome. Why have you returned? He inquired. My motto is, I never give up, I said with a smile. My father-in-law's attitude remained unchanged. I will not change my mind no matter how many times you come, so please don't waste your time, he summarized. Yes, I see, but I won't just leave. I have my own pride, I retorted. When my father-in-law heard this, he changed his attitude. Suit yourself. Do you have anything to say to me? I repeated the words of my marriage proposal. Please allow me to marry Andres. No, Andres is not going to marry a poor woman, he replied coldly. Expected response. We are not poor. Furthermore, are you wealthy enough to call others poor? I retorted. What the hell? Morgan exclaimed. I took over my father's company and grew it from 20 employees to 2,000 employees, including affiliated companies, he explained and added, Are you serious? How can I be poor from a great company? The sales have increased from 100 million to over 10 billion per year. After listening to him, I asked, Isn't that the company's money? It's not your money, right? My father-in-law began yelling at me, probably because I hit a nerve. What exactly are you trying to say? Enough with the disrespect. If you want to persuade me, show me that you have more money than I do, he demanded. Is money the only way to judge a person? It isn't. Money is not to measure a person, I responded. My father-in-law's voice became even louder. That's a scumbag's line. See if you really want money. I'll give you that money in exchange for you to never come to my house again, he suggested. That sounds like something a wealthy man would say, and it suits you, I said. Oh, come on, Bella, Andres interjected. Father, you too, please stop, he said, coming over to stop us. Don't say anything, his father replied sharply. No, this is between Bella and I to begin with, Andres uttered. Stop talking. I'm going to show this poor woman how wonderful I am, Morgan added. I will not marry you until this is resolved, I stated firmly. We came here to talk about our marriage, but why is this happening? Andres asked, holding his head. I'd like to see your parents, Morgan said. Huh? Is that the case? I marveled. Then I'll fulfill your request. I'll bring my parents the next time I see you. Yes, bring them to me and I'll assess their parenting abilities. I'm sure they're just as rude as you are because they raised such a rude daughter, he sneered. Why was someone like Andres born from you? I'm sure my mother-in-law has great genes, I said sarcastically. Thank you very much, Bella, my mother-in-law replied, overjoyed. Hey, why are you so cheerful? Morgan asked. That's enough. We'll have a long conversation when your parents come over, Andres' father added. I'll have a long talk with them and tell them that a daughter like you is not suited for this house, he concluded. Andres, on the other hand, became enraged. What a heinous thing to say. I no longer consider you to be a parent. I'm going to end the father-son relationship. So, should I divorce as well? Andres' mother asked. I don't want to be with someone who says such hideous things. When I got home, I told my parents about what happened. So you say, if you insist, I'll go see him, my father said after hearing the entire story. Yes, you should give him a good talking to. I'd like to meet Andres' mother, however, my mother said. You don't have to come. It'll be too complicated, I objected. I wanted to go, my mother said, looking forward to meeting Andres' mother. She was so ecstatic that she imagined herself making friends with Andres' mother. Your pace will drive me insane, I uttered. It is under my control. I'm only concerned with you, Mom responded. She pretended to cry out of frustration. By the way, what was the name of Andres' father again? Dad requested. Morgan, I replied. Morgan? When my father heard the name Morgan, he began to twist his head. I was curious about it, so I asked my father, Do you know him? To which he replied, No, it's just something that's bothered me. And father shook his head once more. You forgot, my mother said, joking. Ah yes, that's him, that scumbag, he finally recalled. And he knew him? I was taken aback by the coincidence. What, you knew who Andres' father was? I exclaimed. Yes, Bella, call Andres' father, he asked me to. Is next Saturday okay? I questioned. That's all right, and I'm going to be late, so could you go ahead of me? My father asked. What? You're not coming with me? I asked, surprised to learn that he would not accompany me. You know, the show star has to make an appearance at the end, my father said. I understand, I answered. I'm not sure what my father was thinking, but I decided to let him handle it. It was the day of the battle. I'm going to be a little late, as I planned. I'll call you when I arrive, so just hang tight until then, my father said. We came to Andres' house for the third time as the autumn season deepened. I briefly greeted him and was led into the guest room. My father-in-law sat there, looking serious as usual. Hello, mother-in-law. I was looking forward to seeing you today, I uttered. Hello, Bella. I know your father is also here today. What do you think your father would like to drink? She inquired. She appeared to be enjoying herself, and I felt a little better after seeing her. There is no need to prepare any liquor. I mean, this is the third time you've come. What a waste of our fine liquor on a poor man, Morgan retorted. Thank you for your concern, mother-in-law, but not right now, I thanked her. Isn't your father with you, by the way? Did he get scared? My father-in-law smirked. He continued speaking to me as if he looked down on me. He's only a few minutes late because he needs to get ready. I apologize. Well, it doesn't really matter, he muttered. In an irritated tone, Andres finally spoke up. Enough of this. I'll be the one getting married. You don't need to complain. His words did not reach my father-in-law. I'm doing everything I can for you, he said. It's none of your business, Andres exclaimed angrily. My father called while we were having this kind of conversation. I just got a call from my father. He has arrived. I then heard the doorbell ring. I apologize for bothering you, came my father's voice. Oh, hello there, my dear. It's been a long time. My mother-in-law greeted him in an unusually warm manner. I'm sure she had never met my father before, but, I speculated. I'm so glad you remember me. Please excuse me, but I'm here today as Bella's father. Thank you for having Bella, my dad responded. No, it's my pleasure. Everyone is expecting you. Please make your way this way, Andres' mom continued. Thank you kindly. My father was led into the guest room. Good day, Morgan. It's been a while, he said when he saw my father-in-law. Upon hearing this, my father-in-law abruptly stood up, his body stiff and tense. Oh, you were a colonel before you retired, I believe. Please forgive me, he saluted. His head tilted slightly forward, hands by his sides, as he gave a short salute, since he was indoors and without a hat. This unexpected behavior left Andres and me baffled. Don't be so rigid. I was a colonel, and you were a sergeant major a long time ago. After all, this is your house. You've done well for yourself. Wasn't it worth it for me to train you? My father's voice was kind, but firm. Ha. Anyway, I'm sorry to bother you here, but please have a seat, Morgan replied. Oh, thank you. You should sit down too. You're making everyone uncomfortable standing here, my father thanked him. Well then, if you'll excuse me, my father-in-law responded, sitting down formally. Dad, do you know each other? I asked, still shocked. Yes, when I was in the armed forces a long time ago, he came to us as a new worker, my father explained gently, while my father-in-law sat, tense and curled into himself. Well, what a coincidence we meet again like this. I heard you're the president now. That dropout has come a long way, hasn't he? My father continued. Ha, I apologize for the trouble I caused you when I was in the military. After retiring from the army, I took over my father's company. With a lot of help, we've come this far. My father-in-law tried to sound polite, but his face was reddening. The lousy worker is now a president, huh? You're lucky to be president now, Dad remarked. Well, can we stop talking about the old days? Morgan asked my father, wanting to ease the tension. Hey, you know what? Is Chief Petty Officer a big deal? I asked my father curiously. You were a colonel, weren't you? Yeah, a sergeant major is like a section chief in a company, he responded. I said. I was, well, in a better position, my father added. My father-in-law nodded his head at that. I didn't know that Andres' partner was your daughter, Morgan said. So, don't give me rank. I'm a retired civilian now, my father said, smiling. Yes, sir? I will do so, sir. My father-in-law, still anxious, replied. My daughter has told me many things about you, my father said, his tone now stern. You've always had this weird obsession with being higher or lower than your partner. I told you to stop it, but you're still doing it. I heard you've been looking down on our daughter and saying she's poor, he asked angrily. That's right, my father-in-law's voice shrank more and more. Yes, I am truly sorry, he added. My father continued. After I retired from the military, I took care of a company you may have heard of, Star Heavy Industries. The president is my cousin. He's tied to the armed forces. He now heads the technical development department and a director. My father-in-law's eyes widened. Yes. Is it Star Heavy Industries? He marveled. Yes, that's right. As I recall, our company and your company have a business relationship, my father added. Yes, sir. Star Heavy Industries is an important business partner of ours. We are very grateful to you, Morgan replied. My father smiled, but kept up the pressure. As it stands, I think we need to give things some thought, he said. I had been looked down upon for so long. Seeing my father assert himself for me was exhilarating. No, that's very troubling. Andres' father started stammering. My father's tone became a little stern in reply. Then, as a parent, shouldn't you give your blessing to Andres and Bella's marriage? We're not as poor as you think, he uttered. I was very sorry for my impoliteness. My father-in-law bowed his head deeply. That's right, my father said, finally looking up at us. Andres and Bella, this means that there is no more problem with their marriage. Yes. Thank you very much, Andres said, clearly relieved. Thank you, Father, I added, my heart swelling with gratitude. Without him, this might not have ended well. Chief Morgan! My mother-in-law's commanding tone broke through the air. She had her hands on her waist and smirked. Even you. What are you talking about? Morgan muttered, quiet. My father winked at me with a thumbs up. Then Andres and I had a successful wedding. Many of my father's college classmates attended the reception. They were all big names in the armed forces. Chief Morgan was put in charge of giving the orders during a gymnastics performance by the old veterans, and we laughed as they tweeted and did their exercises. Since that day, whenever my mother-in-law had a request, she would call him Chief Petty Officer Morgan and speak to him in a commanding tone. Now he can't stand her. I live a happy life with Andres, blessed with 2 boys. My father is so attached to his grandchildren that he looks too happy when he sees them. One day, a friend who had worked with my father came to visit. Upon seeing my father playing with the children, he laughed bitterly. That man who was once called the devil, he said with a wry smile. Today, my father and the kids are playing hero in the garden. Miracle beam, B. Gee, I've been hit. My father and children were covered in mud. Oh my God, he's a boy, isn't he? I laughed with my mother. You kids, you could be real heroes in the future, you know. Go for it, future heroes. My in-laws have moved into a new designer apartment and are living freely. One morning, my father-in-law Derek scolded me out of nowhere. Why didn't you see your husband off to work? What were you thinking? He demanded. I got a call for work and just couldn't see him off, I tried to explain. My mother-in-law Sloane stood nearby with a sarcastic smile. You know, I always say that staying at home is not a job. You're like a parasite, she said. Derek chimed in again. I'm sure our son who works outside the home earns more. You should respect your husband and support him more. You're a useless wife. I couldn't stand their words anymore. Why do my in-laws, who live in my house without paying any expenses, feel they can treat me like this? When I uttered, I cannot respect my husband, Sloane looked shocked. I can't believe it. Someone who talks like that isn't family. A stranger should leave, she exclaimed. Derek backed her up immediately. That's right. We'll live here with our son. You leave. We can pay rent of $300. I was momentarily stunned. $300. What are these people talking about? But having been spoken to like that, I decided I didn't care anymore. Fine, I'll leave, I replied. At that moment, I was done with them. My name is Jenna Davis. I'm a 30-year-old graphic designer working from home, and my business is doing well. In fact, I earn a good income. My husband, Eric, is a regular office worker, and we've been married for 3 years. After we got married, he would help with household chores if I asked, but he also tells his male friends, household chores are a woman's job, so I let my wife handle it. I never noticed this vain side of him until after we were married. We used to live in a regular rental apartment until one day, there was a water leak from the floor above. We tried to save our furniture and appliances, but some were damaged. After negotiations with the landlord, we received a small compensation and decided to move. Hey Jenna, why don't we move here next? Eric suggested one day, showing me a website for a designer apartment near the station. The rent was $3,000, more than double our current $1,200 rent. I'd rather save for our future children, I replied, hesitant. I've always wanted to live in a place like this, he said, trying to convince me. If we combine our incomes, living here wouldn't be difficult. Living in such a stylish place might even motivate you more for work. And if it gets too much, we can move somewhere else. Please, he pleaded. I couldn't refuse after that. So, we signed the contract under his name, and I agreed to help with the payments. The apartment was beautiful, and I felt more motivated at work, but I still had concerns, especially about my in-laws, who seemed to be getting more involved in our lives since we moved. Derek had taken early retirement at 60 and was home every day. Sloane had never worked and was always a housewife. My relationship with them had never been great. For example, when Eric and I visited their apartment recently, they greeted him warmly, while ignoring me completely. Eric, glad you could make it. Come on in. they said, smiling without even glancing in my direction. Hello, Father. Hello, Mother, I greeted them hesitantly. Oh, Jenna. You're here too, Sloane said with barely concealed disinterest. I stood awkwardly beside them. Then Derek barked, Hey, make some snacks for the drinks. It was still daytime, but he acted like it was a party. I glanced over at Sloane, who was busy taking photos with Eric for her social media, completely unconcerned with the situation. She was obsessed with social media, always posting pictures of luxury brands and accessories, though they lived in a cheap apartment. Later, I discovered she was registered with a luxury brand rental service. Maybe Eric got his pretentious attitude from her. Reluctantly, I made snacks for Derek. What's this? He complained. The taste is too bland. Sloane, overhearing, smirked. You really can't do anything, can you? Poor Eric, having such a useless wife. Eric, who was sitting nearby, pretended not to hear any of this. Since the start of our marriage, he'd always tried to please his parents. Moving closer to them hadn't helped, but I thought it best to avoid involving myself with them more than necessary. Then, a month after we moved, just before our wedding anniversary, an incident happened. I had bought ingredients for a small celebration at home. As Eric and I were about to toast, the door suddenly opened. In walked Derek and Sloane without even ringing the doorbell. Father, Mother, I said, startled. Today is your wedding anniversary celebration, right? That's why we came, they said cheerfully. I couldn't believe Eric's words, but he happily invited them in. I was confused and still trying to process what was happening when I saw the large bags they were carrying. Father, Mother, what's going on? And those big bags? I inquired, perplexed. Sloane looked around the apartment. Oh, the stylishness of this designer's apartment is just wonderful. It's like a dream to live here. Derek added, Didn't Eric tell you? We've given up our old apartment. Our things will be here tomorrow. From today, you'll take care of us properly, as a wife should. What? I turned to Eric in shock. Actually, Eric began, it was time to renew my parents' apartment lease, and since we have unused rooms, I thought why not live together? Sloane looked at me in surprise. What's with that face? Do you have a problem with us living here? She snapped. Yeah, what's the complaint? Derek echoed. From that day, I was forced to live with my in-laws. Life afterward became a constant struggle. Derek gave me orders in an overbearing manner, making me buy alcohol and do chores. Once, he even threw laundry in my face. To him, I was nothing more than a servant. Meanwhile, Sloane flaunted our home on social media, using my clothes and shoes without permission. Whenever I tried to speak up, they belittled me. Exhausted, I complained to Eric. The way your father and mother treat me is awful, I said, hoping he'd understand. Don't worry about it, Eric said dismissively, brushing me off. Not only was I frustrated with my in-laws, but I was also growing resentful of Eric for not taking me seriously. Then, one day, Eric came home from work in the middle of a weekday, looking irritated. What's wrong, Eric? I asked. My company told me I'd be transferred to an affiliated retail store, he grumbled. A transfer? Isn't that a good opportunity? I asked, confused. No, I'm not accepting it. I told them it must be some kind of joke, so I got angry and quit the company, he said, loosening his tie and sitting down roughly on the sofa. What? I was in shock. How could you just quit? What about the rent for this place? Eric shrugged. Your income is nearly $10,000 a month, right? That should be enough to cover living expenses and the rent, he concluded. Are you serious? I demanded, furious. And don't tell Dad and Mom about this, Eric added nonchalantly. I don't want to worry them. I'll find a new job soon, so don't stress about it. I was fuming, but at that moment I couldn't just walk away from my unemployed husband. From that day on, in addition to housework, I had to pay the living expenses and rent for 4 people by myself. Eric would leave the house every morning in a suit, trying not to let his parents realize he had quit his job. At first, I thought he was looking for work, but he didn't return home all day. One day, I followed him and discovered he was gambling with his unemployment benefits. After a fierce argument, he didn't change his mind. Instead, he started making sarcastic comments about me being busy with work. One morning, Eric sat arrogantly at the dining table, reading the newspaper, still dressed in his suit. I had worked late the night before, so I was rushing around. I managed to prepare breakfast for my late-rising in-laws and Eric. While washing dishes, my mother-in-law said in a displeased tone, "Jenna, this fried egg is too hard." I paused, confused. "What?" I made it as usual, though. "I only eat soft-boiled fried eggs," my father-in-law interjected sharply. "Make it again, now," he demanded. Just as I was about to argue, my phone rang. A client was calling. I answered it, and Eric, clearly irritated that I was busy, clicked his tongue, shot me a cold look, and left the house without eating his breakfast. After I hung up, my in-laws stood in front of me with crossed arms, clearly upset. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "You need to get your act together," my father-in-law said sternly. "How could you not see off your husband when he's going to work?" "I got a work call. I couldn't see him off," I replied, timid but truthful. My mother-in-law scoffed. "You know, I've always said that just sitting at home doing work isn't a real job. You're like a parasite," she continued wryly. My father-in-law added, "Obviously, Eric's income from working outside is more important. Respect your husband more. You're a useless wife," he concluded. "Respect Eric?" I replied, unable to contain my anger. "Eric quit his job on a whim and doesn't even try to find a new one. Why do I have to be berated by you two, freeloading in my house without contributing to expenses?" My words hit them hard. Both their faces reddened. "Well, I can't believe it," my mother-in-law sputtered. "Someone who talks like that isn't family. A stranger should leave," she added. "That's right," my father-in-law agreed. "We'll live with our son. You should get out. We can pay about $300 for rent." I was momentarily stunned. $300 for rent? The actual rent is 10 times that. $3,000. How are they this clueless? But the decision was made. I wouldn't stay where I was disrespected. "Understood. I will leave," I answered calmly. Ignoring their taunts, I packed my belongings and left. I moved into a weekly apartment, finding some peace. But a few weeks later, Eric called me repeatedly. Reluctantly, I answered. He wanted to meet and talk. I thought it was time to face him, so I agreed. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was surprised to see that Eric had brought his parents along. Before I could ask what was going on, Eric spoke quickly. "Hey, Jenna! What do you mean by getting a divorce? I won't accept it. Don't you dare divorce me without my consent." I calmly replied, "Oh, you saw the divorce papers I sent?" Eric turned pale. My in-laws glared at me. "Your parents have been harassing me every day since they moved in," I said, my voice steady. "You never listened to a single one of my complaints." My words seemed to shake him. "You're divorcing me for that?" Eric asked, incredulous. "Don't think you can just walk away. I won't agree to it." His parents looked equally shocked, but his mother chimed in. "Eric, why would you want to stay with someone like her? We said we could pay $300 for rent, didn't we?" At that, I couldn't help but laugh. $300? That was the parking fee. I pulled out the rent bill from my bag. "The actual rent is $3,000. My in-laws' faces turned white. The $3,000? My mother-in-law stammered. "Then how much have you been paying this whole time?" "Everything," I said flatly. "I've been covering all the expenses with my income. The same income you both dismissed as being from a parasite." "We didn't know," my mother-in-law cried. Eric, with his head in his hands, whispered, "I'm sorry, Jenna. Please, come back. I can't live without you." "What about your parents?" I asked coldly. "They don't seem sorry." Eric glanced at them and then urged, "Apologize." They muttered weak apologies, but I had made up my mind. "I don't intend to come back and I want a divorce. I'll never forgive any of you. We will never meet again," I firmly stated. Eric broke down in tears, but I walked away, leaving him with his trembling parents. Later, I finalized the divorce through a lawyer. I received most of the assets as alimony, leaving Eric with almost nothing. Then, I exposed my in-laws' behavior on social media. As a result, my mother-in-law's account was flooded with criticism, and she eventually deleted it. They couldn't afford the $3,000 rent. and they were evicted. They moved into a shabby apartment. Eric found a new job, but it paid much less. He couldn't support his parents anymore. My father-in-law had to work in a factory, and my mother-in-law, having shut down her social media, lost the energy to leave the house. Meanwhile, I moved to a designer apartment perfect for single living. Without the stress of that toxic environment, my work flourished, and I even adopted a cat that I adore. My life is on the rise again, and I intend to build it positively from now on.